Yeah, first I will introduce myself, and then I'm going to probably turn my camera off for most of the time. So I'm Noah. Hi. I'm the planner for the Hazardous Waste Program for the state of Hawaii, and we're in the Solid and Hazardous Waste branch in the Department of Health. And this is a webinar on updates to our Department of Health rules for hazardous waste that became effective on January 29th, 2024. All right, perfect. So I want to give you a little bit of background about our state hazardous waste rules before I talk about the changes, because I know that there are a lot of new folks and it's been quite a long time since we had one of these webinars. So I'm going to start with some background and then I'll give you the sort of list of all the changes and then we'll go through them one by one. So the state hazardous waste rules are Title 11, Chapters 260.1 to 279.1, Hawaii Administrative Rules. And a lot of times you'll see this written as Chapters 11-260.1 to 11-279.1. These state rules incorporate by reference some federal rules from EPA. So the federal rules that we're incorporating are in Title 40 of the Code of Federal Regulations. And the part numbers are 124 and then a bunch of parts between 260 and 279. So the numbers of the chapters roughly correspond to these federal part numbers in a way that's helpful in terms of figuring out where you are. And I'll show you that in a little bit more detail on another slide. And then I also want to talk about the guidebooks because I'm often recommending to people that they look at the guidebooks. They're basically trying to take the state and federal rules and kind of mash them together so that you can look at them in one place, because it's really difficult to actually read our state rules. And in order to read them and understand what they mean, you have to have the federal rules next to them and kind of go back and forth. And so the guidebooks sort of do that for you. So they take the text of the federal rules that are being incorporated by reference, and then they make the changes that are made to that incorporation in the state rules, and they show sort of like the virtual contents of the state rules, if that makes sense. And so when you go to our rules website, a big portion of it is taken up with this table that you see at the bottom of the slide here that gives the Hawaii administrative rules and then two different versions of the guidebooks. Right now, I don't have the no track changes because I need to remake those for the new rules. And things have been really busy. As some of you know, the biennial report was just due on March 1st. So I was working on that. And also we're in the middle of legislative session. So it's been a very busy time in my office, and I apologize, but I will get you the second set of guidebooks very soon. Probably within the next week, maybe 2 weeks. I do want to take a pause here and go to the website itself and sort of point out a few things. So I'm going to exit out of the PowerPoint, and this is the rules page. I'm actually going to go back one to the hazardous waste section homepage. I strongly encourage you all to bookmark this page. It's health.hawaii.gov/SHWB. That's for solid and hazardous waste branch /HazWaste. And then this page has a lot of very useful and important links on it. And one of those links is the rules page. So the top of it says rules and guidebooks, again, because the guidebooks are super important and useful to the incorporation by reference rules. And I put this new link at the top just because everything is getting sort of long. When you scroll down the page, you're scrolling for a long time, this link will take you to the bottom of the table where the history of the rule updates is. And so this is the material that we're going over today. And right here, this link has the detailed list of all of the changes, which includes some really minor corrections to punctuation and things like that that we're not going to go over in this presentation. But if you want to see a list of absolutely every change that has just been made to the rules, there's a PDF here that you can open and look at. So back to the top of the page. Another important thing I want to show you is this link to another PDF, How to Cite Hawaii Administrative Rules, chapters 11.260.1 to 11.279.1. Only some people need this, but if you are making a legal citation to the state rules, it's a little bit complicated to cite a specific part of most of the rules because they are incorporating the federal rules. So there's a guide for you how to do that here. If you have any questions about that or you need help with it, please feel free to contact me. So I just want to show you a couple of examples about the rules and guidebooks here. I'm going to open the state rules for chapter 262.1. This is the standards for generators, so a lot of you are probably familiar with it. I don't know if you've ever clicked on the rules themselves, but this is what they look like. So each chapter has a section at the beginning that incorporates the federal rules, a section making substitutions of state terms and citations, where there are federal terms and citations in those incorporated rules, and then lots of amendments to specific parts of the federal rules. Some of the chapters also have other sections that have content that's not in the federal rules, and that will be, I think, in most of them at the end of the chapter. Oh, so here's one actually. Section 16, imports of hazardous waste, has some requirements in it that don't correspond to the federal rules. And so these are pretty tough to read. They kind of look like legal gobbledygook. And I don't necessarily recommend to most people to attempt to read them. But those are the official rules. And then the guidebooks for each chapter, it tells you, you know, this isn't a substitute. It's not the actual rules, it's a guide to the rules, and then it tells you what's here. So section 16 is here because there's no equivalent in the federal regulations. And then we have the table of contents for 40 Code of Federal Regulations, Part 262. That's the federal rules that are being incorporated. And then it says, you know, this is incorporated and it's got amendments in these sections. And it sort of explains how this guidebook is made. So these PDFs, if you download them, and I think I'm actually gonna open up one of them in Adobe so that you can see. So I downloaded this the other day. Okay. Because I do want to point out the bookmarks. So in Adobe, there's two good ways to navigate this. One, you have a clickable table of contents, but the other one is the bookmark feature. So you can open this up and all of the subparts have little collapsed kind of tables of contents. And this is a really helpful way to get around in these rules. So in this guidebook for the rules. So this guidebook shows track changes like this with the red strikeout, and then there are also things that are added in that are underlined. These are the differences between the federal and the state version of the rules. So this is not showing the changes that were made to the state rules, it's showing what is different from the federal rules. And it's showing what's different from the version of the federal rules that's listed here at the beginning of the guidebook. This is the version that is incorporated right now in the state rules. So hopefully that makes sense and is helpful. I'm gonna go back to my slides. And this is a picture that I took of that guidebook showing the bookmarks because I really didn't want to forget to show you guys that. So just a note here, there are significant changes only in certain chapters for this particular rulemaking. And so those significant changes are in chapters 260.1 to 265.1, and then also in 273.1. Which means that there are not significant changes to the other chapters. So depending on what kind of regulated activity you're doing, you may know some of these chapter numbers and they have a particular significance to you. So you're just, pay attention to whether these are the chapters that you care about or not. So this is just a list of the chapters showing the corresponding Hawaii Administrative Rules chapter number and then the Title 40 Code of Federal Regulations part number and what's in there. So all of these chapters have significant changes in this update. So we have general provisions, identification and listing of hazardous waste. 262.1 that we were looking at is for generators. And then 263.1 transporters, treatment, storage, and disposal facilities is 264.1. And then interim TSDFs, which we don't have, but there are a few provisions in there that are cross-referenced from other chapters. So certain generators might use that chapter. And then no significant changes in 266.1 to 271.1 or 279.1. So the only one on this slide that has significant changes, and this is actually where the most significant changes in this rulemaking are, is 273.1 universal waste. So I know that's why a lot of you are here, and we will get to those changes, but we're going to get to them last because they're the longest. So just wanted to give you a little bit of the lay of the land there, and now we'll talk about the actual updates to the rules. So the first thing is that we've changed the version of the federal rules that are incorporated by reference. In the previous state rules, we were incorporating the 2020 version of the federal rules, and now we're switching to the 2022 version of the federal rules. And so that means we're adopting two new EPA rules by doing that. One of them is about ignitable liquids testing, and the other one is on Canada import-export codes. So those are the only, and they're both, I would say, relatively minor new federal rules that are adopted in this rulemaking package. The other changes are state-initiated changes. So the first one we're going to talk about is some changes to the emergency information posting requirement for small quantity generators. And then we have the universal waste changes, which we'll go over in more detail. And then there are numerous minor corrections and clarifications, which, like I mentioned, we're not going to cover in this webinar, but there is a whole list of them. And if you have any questions about any of them, I'm happy to talk to you about them. It's just a long list of very small things. And they don't make a substantive difference. Some of them are like, getting rid of cross references to something that was already deleted in a previous rule change, that kind of cleanup stuff. So for universal waste, we have changes to battery labeling. We have an allowance for handlers of universal waste solar panels to be able to remove the frames. And then we have some changes for universal waste electronic items. And those are to do with labeling, clarification on the removal of discrete components, and then an allowance for handlers of universal waste electronic items to destroy storage media in particular ways with particular conditions, and we'll come to the details of all of that. So, new federal rules from EPA. Again, we've got two of them. The first one is on ignitable liquids. So the actual title of this rule is Modernizing Ignitable Liquids Determinations. And it does a few different things. One is to allow test methods that are related to the flash point of liquid waste and also air sampling. So we're allowing certain new methods and then updating some test methods to align with ASTM and EPA standards, because these test methods get updated from time to time. So for example, EPA methods 1010A and 1020B are updated to 1010B and 1020C. So it's just like a newer version of the same method. Another thing is to allow alternatives to tests that require the use of mercury thermometers. We're sort of getting beyond mercury thermometers at this time, which is great. Codifying the existing guidance that defines aqueous. So changing the phrase aqueous solution to a solution that's at least 50% water by weight. And this is pertaining to certain alcohol wastes. And then also there are updates to references to Department of Transportation regulations. And these have to do with when a compressed gas is characterized as ignitable. So I'm not going to go into all of the details of that. But if you're interested, these slides are going to be posted with the video, and there's a link here to the rule. It's in 40 CFR section 261.21, I think. I had this on my slide notes, but I don't see it. I'm pretty sure it's 0.21. And so as that section is incorporated and amended in the state rules in chapter 261.1. All right, so the next one is on import-export codes for Canada. So here at the top of the slide is the very long official title of this federal rule. And what this is doing is changing codes that are used in import and export notices that are submitted to EPA. So it doesn't affect you unless you're importing and exporting waste from Canada. I think we had one generator in the state export to Canada in the past few years. Nobody's importing. So that's good. And then this is actually just conforming with language that's already been adopted into Canada's regulations. And these codes are representing specific recovery and disposal operations. So if anybody is interested in this, there's a link on the slide to the rule. And the main change to the text is in 40 CFR section 262.81. So that section is then incorporated into the state rules. Okay. Next one. So now we're starting into the state initiated changes. Is the change to small quantity generator emergency information posting. So emergency information needs to be posted in areas where hazardous waste is generated and stored. And the change is that there's an exception for sites where cell phones cannot be used safely in hazardous waste generation and accumulation areas. Rather than posting where the hazardous waste is generated and stored, you post next to the nearest phone. And the reason it says phones in plural is because you may have multiple areas on your site where hazardous waste is being generated and stored, and you should be posting this information at the nearest phone for each area. So this is showing the difference between the federal text and the state text. So in the federal rules, it says next to the phone or in areas directly involved in generation and accumulation of hazardous waste. And the previous version of the state rules had changed this or right here to an and. So this is not showing the change from what the state rules were. It's showing the difference from the federal rules, which is the same way that the guidebooks with track changes work. And so this is just showing the actual, like what you need to post. And this is the rule language itself. Okay, welcome back from break. There are a couple of questions in the question and answer, so I'm gonna start with answering these. If you have a question, please feel free to type it in to the question and answer. The first one is there a cheat sheet or guide template for the emergency posting info? And the answer to that is the state of Hawaii does not provide one, but I think it is very likely that you could find one that exists in the world. I'm a big fan of just going to the rules. So there was a list in the rules of exactly what needs to be posted for a small quantity generator, and I would use that as the guide. Yeah. So next question is, I would prefer to concentrate on content. So will this recording be made available so I can get all these references? Yes, absolutely. I'm sorry, I should have said this at the beginning of the presentation, but I really feel like these things should be stress-free and you don't have to take notes. All of the links on the slides and everything and the recording will be posted on the website. All right, so most of the changes in this rulemaking are about universal waste. And I'm gonna start with the small changes and move toward the big changes. So just a reminder, this is a slide from the beginning that we already saw. We have battery labeling, solar panel deframing, and then a few different changes for electronic item universal waste. So for batteries, these are the labeling options. And the only thing that's changed is this adding the option for labeling each designated battery storage area that's demarcated by boundaries. So this is just to make things easier for you, rather than having to label every battery or every container or pallet of universal waste batteries. You can just label the designated battery storage area. This was already an option, I think, for solar panels. So we're just extending that option to universal waste batteries. Okay, now solar panels. So deframing, we're allowing universal waste handlers to manually or mechanically remove the frames from solar panels without a hazardous waste treatment permit under conditions. So don't break the glass, the solar panel glass, and you also will clean up and containerize the glass if it is broken. There are conditions for how you're storing the panels, and the metal frames that are being removed must be recycled. So I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on all of this, but I just want to note where you can find the rule language. So this is in 40 CFR section 273.13 G3 as it's incorporated and amended in the state rules. So this rule language doesn't exist in the federal rules at all, but it's put into a specific citation under the structure of the federal rules because they're incorporated into the state rules. And then the same language is also found in 40 CFR section 273.33 G3 as incorporated and amended in chapter 11-273.1 Hawaii Administrative Rules. So a little bit more detail. The standard for don't break the glass is all reasonable efforts shall be made to minimize the breakage of solar panel glass. And then, as I mentioned before, the metal framing needs to be recycled. Broken pieces of solar panel glass shall be cleaned up and placed in a container at the end of each work shift during which framing is removed from solar panels. And the container must be closed, structurally sound, compatible with the contents of the solar panel, and lack evidence of leakage, spillage, or damage that could cause leakage under reasonably foreseeable conditions. Those conditions about the container probably sound very familiar, and that's because they're the same as in another part of the rules. And the broken pieces must also be managed as universal waste. Solar panels with framing removed shall be stored in a horizontal stack and shall be stretch film wrapped as soon as practicable, or at a minimum at the end of each work shift. And the solar panels with framing removed need to be stored in one of two ways. They need to be stored either in a building with a permanent roof and floor that is constructed and maintained to minimize breakage of solar panels and to prevent exposure of the solar panels to precipitation. And I'll just note here, we didn't put this in the rule language, but it's also best practice to prevent exposure to sunlight. And then the other option would be a closed and secure container that is constructed and maintained to minimize breakage of solar panels and to prevent exposure of the solar panels to precipitation, and hopefully prevent exposure to sunlight as well. And that's it for the solar panels. So for universal waste electronic items, we also have a change to labeling, and it's basically the same change as what we have for universal waste batteries. It's just adding this option for labeling of a designated electronic item storage area that's demarcated by boundaries. So you still have to use one of the options on the right side of this slide for labeling. You can either say universal waste electronic items, or item, waste electronic item or items, used electronic item or items. And that label's got to be either on each item, each container or pallet, or a designated storage area demarcated by boundaries. And the same goes now for the batteries and the solar panels. Okay, so the next change is in the language about removing discrete components. So this is just a clarification, and the removal of components that are typically removed by consumers for replacement during the normal operational life of an electronic item was already allowed in the rules that were adopted in 2021. The change is in the language, so we're changing discrete assemblies to discrete components. And then also adding hard drives and solid state drives as examples of discrete components that could be removed. And this is under a list of things that universal waste handlers are allowed to do, managing the universal waste while they're storing it without having a permit. So this is found in 40 CFR section 273.13 F4 Roman numeral 3 and 273.33 F4 Roman numeral 3, as those are incorporated and amended in chapter 11-273.1. And now the big change, what you're all here for, I think, storage media destruction. So the new rules allow universal waste handlers to drill holes in or crush electronic storage media for the purpose of meeting data security standards without having a hazardous waste treatment permit under certain conditions. So you need to have written procedures for this. It's done over a catchment area or a container. And then the debris that's created by the drilling or crushing needs to be containerized, as well as the electronic storage media needs to be containerized, and then both are going to be managed as universal waste. So we'll go into a little more detail on this. This is found in 40 CFR section 273.13 F6 and 273.33 F6 as incorporated and amended in chapter 11-273.1 HAR. So you're allowed to drill holes in or crush hard drives, solid state drives, or similar electronic storage media for the purpose of meeting data security standards or media sanitization standards. And you must meet the following requirements. Written procedures need to be established and followed, and these procedures are detailing how to safely drill holes in or crush the storage media. So this is particular to what kind of equipment you're using, whether you're drilling or crushing, what kind of storage media you're working on. Like, this has to actually be the detail of it. It's going to include proper assembly, operation, and maintenance of the drilling or crushing device, and proper waste management practices to prevent releases. You're required to maintain a copy of that written procedure on site. And then you're going to make sure that employees who are conducting the drilling or crushing are trained in that proper procedure. So as I already said, this is just kind of more detail on how the rules lay this out. So you need to conduct drilling or crushing over a catchment area or container and immediately collect and containerize any debris generated. So hopefully you don't really have to collect it because it's already collected, and it's inside of your catchment area or container to begin with. But if anything escapes, you have to immediately collect it, and then you have to containerize it. And as I said before, managing that debris and the electronic storage media that you're drilling or crushing as universal waste. And then you also have the container standards that are the same as what we went over for the broken glass from a solar panel. And these are just sort of the standard container conditions that are all over the hazardous waste rules. The container must be structurally sound, compatible with the contents, lack evidence of leakage, spillage, or damage that could cause leakage under reasonably foreseeable conditions, and the container must remain closed, except when drilling, crushing, or adding waste. And that's it. So it's actually not as many changes as some of the recent rulemakings that we've had. In terms of, adopting some of these really big federal rules, like the generator improvements rule, the pharmaceuticals rule. It's a relatively small rule update. And now we have plenty of time for questions. I do want to just advance and show you the last couple of slides first, in case some people want to take off, because I know a lot of the questions now are going to be specific to the universal waste rule changes, and maybe there are some people here that are not interested in hearing everybody's questions about that. So I just want to remind you, in case you got this email forwarded to you, or even if you got the email directly from me, it's a good idea to check in RCRA info and make sure that your site's contact information is up to date. So now it's very easy to submit a notification form through RCRA info to update that information anytime you need to. I strongly encourage you to do that, particularly the email address that is listed as the contact for the site. The second one is to sign up for our email list. So on the right-hand side of this slide, it's just showing the little box that's on our website, what that looks like when you sign up for the list. So if you were forwarded this from someone else, please sign up for the email list. And then this last slide just has my email address so that you can contact me, and also the website address for the rules page. Okay, so here is one question. Is there a permit required for universal waste handlers? So the answer to that is no, there is not a permit required. If you're a large quantity universal waste handler, there is a notification requirement. So you do need to update your notification, even if you already have an ID number. If you're going to be a large quantity handler for universal waste, you need to redo the notification form, or form EPA 8700-12, to say that you're going to be a large quantity handler of universal waste. If you need any help with that, you can email me. There's also instructions and a video on the website. Universal waste handlers are limited to the activities that are listed in the rules. If you do anything outside of that, that could be considered treatment of hazardous waste, because of course universal waste is hazardous waste, then you would need a permit. So it is very important to make sure that you're really familiar with what those allowed management practices are for the type of universal waste that you're handling, and make sure that you follow the conditions. What was the impetus for allowing the deframing of solar panels? That's a good question. This was actually a request that we got from the regulated community to consider making a rule to allow deframing. And it has to do with the cost of shipping, because as everyone knows, it's very expensive to ship hazardous waste from Hawaii. It's pretty much all going to the US mainland. And one reason that we made solar panels a universal waste was so that you could save money on shipping them for proper management. And then the idea behind deframing was to allow stacking more panels together so that you could get more of them into the same volume and spend less money on shipment. I have subsequently heard from some other folks in the regulated community that this doesn't seem like such a good idea, because the weight of the panels will cause breakage when you stack more of them together, and that the frames will prevent breakage. So I don't know if it's such a good idea anymore, but basically we didn't want to stand in the way. If there's a safe and economically feasible way to do it, like if it can be done while protecting human health and the environment, we didn't want our rules to be the block for it. Good questions. I don't see any more questions typed in, and I don't see any hands up either. Oh, here's one more. Are the frames recycled in Hawaii? Ideally, I would say that they should be. We did not put that requirement into the rules. We just put the requirement that the frames be recycled. And I know that they can be recycled locally, because they're mostly aluminum. So yes, I mean, part of the idea is that you're not shipping off the frames, you're recycling the frames locally. This is solar panel frames. Yeah. And thanks everybody for coming. I appreciate it. Hope everybody has a good day.